Ma'am, stop right there. I'm ordering you to identify yourself, now.
This is a public sidewalk. I'm walking my dog. What crime do you suspect me of?
You match a suspect description. Don't argue the law with me.
You don't have reasonable suspicion. This is an unlawful
Turn around.
detention.
Hands behind your back, now.
For the record, I do not consent. You are violating my rights.
Judge Evelyn Moore did not look like a threat. At 58 years old, she carried herself with the kind of effortless posture that comes from decades of demanding order in a courtroom. She was dressed in a sensible, high-quality navy blue tracksuit, the kind worn by women who value comfort but refuse to look sloppy. On her feet were expensive walking shoes, and in her left hand, she held a leather leash attached to Barnaby, her 7-year-old golden retriever. Barnaby was wagging his tail, sniffing at a fire hydrant, utterly unconcerned with the mechanics of criminal justice. Evelyn was enjoying her Saturday morning. The week had been particularly grueling, a custody battle involving 3 states and allegations of fraud that had required her to pore over documents until midnight for 4 days straight. This walk was her sanctuary. It was her time to clear her head, to breathe in the fresh air, and to simply be a neighbor in the community where she had lived for 15 years. She had just turned the corner onto Maple Drive, heading back toward her colonial-style home, when the black and white cruiser rolled slowly alongside her. She noticed the car, of course. Being a black woman in America, regardless of one's station in life or bank account balance, meant possessing a peripheral awareness that never truly slept. She saw the vehicle slow to a crawl. She felt the weight of the gaze coming from behind the tinted glass. But she didn't stop. She had no reason to. She gave the leash a gentle tug. "Come along, Barnaby." She murmured, her voice calm, possessing the rich timbre that had silenced arguing attorneys more times than she could count. The cruiser accelerated slightly, then pulled sharply to the curb, blocking her path on the sidewalk. The passenger window didn't roll down. Instead, the driver's door opened. Officer Kyle Braden emerged. He was 29 years old, with the high and tight haircut of someone who desperately wanted to be perceived as a soldier rather than a peace officer. He had been on the force for 4 years, long enough to shed his rookie jitters, but not long enough to acquire actual wisdom. He adjusted his duty belt, a nervous tick that Evelyn recognized immediately from the hundreds of bailiffs and deputies she had worked with over the years. He placed his hand on the radio at his shoulder, his stance widening aggressively. "Ma'am, hold it right there," Braden called out. His voice was loud, shattering the suburban peace. Evelyn stopped. She didn't flinch. She turned slowly, her face a mask of polite but cool inquiry. She shortened the leash, bringing Barnaby to sit by her left leg. The dog looked at the officer and let out a friendly pant. "Is there a problem, officer?" Evelyn asked. Her diction was precise, her tone level. It was the voice she used when a witness was beginning to stray from the facts. "I need you to stay right where you are," Braden said, walking around the front of his cruiser. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't smile. His eyes were scanning her, not looking for a weapon, but looking for a reason. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Break-ins, people casing houses." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I see. And what does that have to do with me?" "You fit the description of a suspicious individual reported earlier." Braden lied. Or perhaps he wasn't lying to her. Perhaps he was lying to himself, convincing his own mind that his bias was actually intuition. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Evelyn Moore had written opinions on the Fourth Amendment. She had presided over cases where the validity of a stop determined whether a child would be removed from a home where drugs were found. She knew the law not as a theory, but as the very architecture of her life. "Officer," she said, shifting her weight slightly, "I am walking my dog on a Saturday morning. I am a resident of this neighborhood. Unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed a crime, or am about to commit one, I am under no obligation to provide you with identification. This is a consensual encounter, is it not?" Braden blinked. He hadn't expected the vocabulary. He hadn't expected the steady gaze. Most people, when confronted by the uniform, crumbled or argued emotionally. This woman was doing neither. She was lecturing him. And that in Kyle Braden's mind was an act of defiance that could not be tolerated. The silence that stretched between them for the next 5 seconds was heavy, filled with the tension of two worlds colliding. On one side stood the raw, unchecked authority of the badge wielded by a man who believed his power was absolute. On the other stood the intellectual weight of the Constitution embodied in a woman who had sworn an oath to uphold it. Braden took a step closer, invading her personal space. "Ma'am, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. This is an investigation. You are required to identify yourself." "Incorrect," Evelyn said. She didn't step back. To retreat was to show fear, and she refused to give him that satisfaction. "Under Terry v. Ohio, you may detain me only if you have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Walking a golden retriever in a residential neighborhood does not meet that standard. Furthermore, under this state's statutes, stop and identify laws only apply after a lawful detention has been established. You have not established that." Braden's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. He wasn't listening to the words. He was reacting to the tone. He heard a challenge to his dominance. He heard a black woman telling him no in broad daylight, and his training, or perhaps his lack of it, kicked into overdrive. "I'm detaining you now." Braden snapped his hand, drifting closer to the taser holstered on his hip. "You're matching the description of a suspect looking into windows. Black female, middle-aged, athletic build." Evelyn almost laughed at the absurdity. "Athletic build, officer, I am 58 years old, and looking into windows, I have been on this sidewalk for the entirety of my walk. If you have a report, it will be time-stamped. My presence here is easily verifiable." "I don't need to debate the law with you on the side of the road," Braden sneered. "I need your ID, now, or we're going to have a problem." "We already have a problem, officer," Evelyn replied, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "The problem is that you are conducting an unlawful seizure. I am telling you for the record that I do not consent to this stop. I am not impeding your investigation, but I am asserting my right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. Am I free to go?" "No, you are not free to go," Braden shouted. The veneer of professionalism was cracking. He looked around, perhaps realizing that they were in a high-visibility area, but rather than checking his behavior, the audience made him double down. He couldn't be seen losing control of the situation. "Then articulate the crime," Evelyn demanded. "What statute do you believe I have violated?" "Loitering," Braden said, grasping at straws. "Prowling. Walking is not loitering. Walking is transit, and prowling requires intent and concealment. I am standing in bright sunlight wearing a blue tracksuit." Evelyn shook her head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "Officer, I am going to give you a chance to walk away from this. You are making a mistake. A very expensive, career-ending mistake. Get back in your car." It was the command in her voice that pushed him over the edge. It was the voice she used when she held a reckless parent in contempt of court. It triggered something primal and ugly in Officer Braden. "Turn around," he barked. "Put your hands behind your back." "For what?" Evelyn asked, not moving. "Failure to obey a lawful order, obstruction of justice, disorderly conduct." He rattled off the catch-all charges that bad police officers used when their egos were bruised. "Those are not crimes in this context," Evelyn stated firmly. "They are excuses. I said turn around." Braden lunged forward, grabbing Evelyn's left arm. Barnaby, sensing the aggression, let out a low, confused woof, but didn't bite. He was a lover, not a fighter, and he cowered slightly behind Evelyn's legs. "Get your hands off me," Evelyn said, not struggling but tensing her muscles. "You are assaulting a citizen without cause." "Stop resisting," Braden yelled the standard refrain for the cameras he knew were rolling, trying to create a narrative that didn't exist. "I am not resisting," Evelyn said clearly, looking directly into the lens of his body camera. "I am standing still. I am being assaulted." From across the street, a door opened. Mrs. Higgins, a 70-year-old retired librarian who had lived on Maple Drive since the Carter administration, stepped onto her porch. She held a smartphone in her hand, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Hey," Mrs. Higgins shouted, her voice thin but sharp. "What are you doing to Evelyn?" Braden whipped his head around. "Back inside, ma'am, police business." "It doesn't look like police business," Mrs. Higgins yelled back. She walked down her driveway, phone held high, recording. "I'm filming this. I see you. That is Judge Moore you are grabbing." Braden froze for a nanosecond. The word judge hung in the air like a guillotine blade. But his brain rejected it. It didn't fit his narrative. Judges were old white men in his experience, or at least people who didn't look like this woman. He dismissed it as a neighbor trying to scare him. "I don't care who she is," Braden yelled. "She's under arrest." The introduction of the witness changed the dynamic, but not in the way one might hope. Instead of realizing the precariousness of his position, Officer Braden felt cornered. The presence of Mrs. Higgins holding her phone with a steady hand meant there was now a secondary record of this encounter. In his mind, backing down now would look like weakness. It would look like he was admitting fault. And in the toxic culture he had absorbed during his short tenure, admitting fault was worse than committing a civil rights violation. "Ma'am, step back or you will be arrested for interference," Braden threatened Mrs. Higgins, pointing a finger at her. "I am on my own property," Mrs. Higgins retorted, showing a surprising amount of grit. "And I am 20 feet away. I am not interfering. I am documenting." Evelyn looked at her neighbor. "Thank you, Martha. Please keep recording. Do not stop." "I won't, Evelyn," Martha Higgins promised. Braden turned his attention back to Evelyn. He twisted her arm behind her back with unnecessary force. Evelyn gasped a sharp intake of breath as pain shot through her shoulder. She had rotatory cuff issues, a nagging injury from tennis years ago, and the torque Braden applied was excruciating. "Officer," Evelyn said through gritted teeth, her voice straining to remain calm, "I have a shoulder injury. You are hurting me. There is no need for force. I am not running." "Should have thought of that before you refused to cooperate," Braden muttered, pulling a set of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratchet sound of the cuffs clicking open was loud in the quiet morning. "You are making a grave error," Evelyn said. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. My name is Evelyn Moore. I am a Superior Court judge for the Family Division. My identification is in my pocket. If you proceed with this arrest, you will be violating judicial immunity statutes in addition to the Fourth Amendment. Check my pocket before you do this." Braden paused. The handcuffs were inches from her wrist. "A judge?" he scoffed. "Yeah, and I'm the police commissioner. If you were a judge, you'd know better than to argue with the police." "It is precisely because I am a judge that I know you are violating the law," Evelyn countered. "Check my ID." "I'll check it at the station," Braden said, snapping the first cuff onto her right wrist. The cold steel bit into her skin. He grabbed her other hand. "What about my dog?" Evelyn asked, panic rising for the first time, not for herself, but for Barnaby. "You cannot leave him here." "Animal control can pick him up," Braden said callously. "No," Mrs. Higgins shouted from the edge of the lawn. "Don't you dare call animal control, I'll take him." "Give him to me." Braden hesitated. He didn't want to do favors, but dealing with a dog was a hassle he didn't want. He looked at Evelyn. "Is that okay with you?" "Martha," Evelyn said, looking at her neighbor with gratitude. "Please take Barnaby. His food is in the pantry. You have the spare key. I've got him, Evelyn. Don't you worry. Mrs. Higgins stepped forward, and Braden allowed her to take the leash. Barnaby looked back at Evelyn, whining softly, sensing the distress. Go with Martha, good boy, Evelyn whispered. As soon as the dog was clear, Braden finished cuffing her. He tightened them too much. Evelyn could feel the circulation being pinched in her thumbs. These are too tight, she stated. They're not meant for comfort, Braden replied, reciting the tired cliché he'd heard in movies. He grabbed her by the bicep and marched her toward the cruiser. As he pushed her toward the back seat, Evelyn stopped and turned to look him directly in the eye. The height difference was negligible, but her presence made her seem 10 feet tall. Officer, she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. Look at the time. It is 10:14 a.m. Mark this moment, because this is the last hour of your life where you will have a badge. You have chosen to ignore the law, ignore reason, and ignore morality. I am not going to sue just the city. I am going to sue you personally. I am going to ensure that you never hold a position of authority over another human being for as long as you live. Braden felt a chill run down his spine, a cold prickle of doubt that he quickly shoved away. He shoved her head down. Watch your head, and pushed her into the hard plastic seat of the patrol car. He slammed the door shut, sealing her in the cage. The back of a police cruiser is designed to dehumanize. The seats are hard, molded plastic that forces the body into an unnatural slump. The partition is a thick, scratched plexiglass wall that separates the clean world of the officer from the dirty world of the arrestee. It smells of stale sweat, industrial disinfectant, and old fear. Evelyn Moore sat in that cage, her hands numb behind her back, her shoulders throbbing. But she did not cry. She did not hyperventilate. She closed her eyes and began to work. Her mind was a steel trap honed by decades of legal scholarship. She began to draft the complaint in her head. Paragraph 1. Plaintiff Evelyn Moore, a resident of Chestnut Hill. Paragraph 2. Defendant Kyle Braden, acting under color of law. Count 1, false imprisonment. Count 2, assault and battery. Count 3, deprivation of rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. She memorized the details. She noted that Braden did not buckle her seatbelt, a violation of department policy. She noted that he was driving 10 miles over the speed limit without his lights or sirens on. She listened to him breathing in the front seat the short, shallow breaths of a man running on adrenaline and arrogance. Braden didn't speak. He turned up the radio slightly, a country station playing a song about beer and trucks trying to drown out the silence. He was nervous. The neighbor's video bothered him. The woman's confidence bothered him. A judge. No, it was impossible. Judges didn't walk dogs in tracksuits. Judges didn't get stopped by the police. Judges were on his side. She was lying. She had to be. The ride to the precinct took 11 minutes. It was the longest 11 minutes of Braden's life, though he wouldn't admit it. For Evelyn, it was simply a gathering of evidence. She cataloged every bump in the road that jarred her wrists. She cataloged the feeling of humiliation, not to wallow in it, but to quantify it for damages. When they pulled into the sally port of the precinct, the automatic garage door rumbled shut behind them, plunging the bay into artificial fluorescent light. Braden killed the engine. He got out and opened the rear door. "Let's go," he said. Evelyn swung her legs out. She stood up with difficulty, lacking her arms for balance. "I am requesting that you loosen these cuffs immediately," she said. "My hands are losing sensation." "We'll get them off inside," Braden muttered. He grabbed her arm again and led her through the heavy steel door into the booking area. The station was busy. Phones were ringing. Officers were typing reports, and the low murmur of bureaucracy filled the air. They walked past a row of holding cells and up to the main processing desk. Behind the high counter sat Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 56, a man with gray hair, a paunch, and weary eyes that had seen everything the city had to offer for 30 years. He was 2 years away from a pension and spent his days trying to ensure that the young hotshots didn't burn the place down. He was drinking coffee from a stained mug and reading a sports blog on his computer when Braden approached with his prisoner. Miller looked up. He saw Officer Braden looking flushed and defiant. Then he looked at the prisoner. He saw a black woman in a blue tracksuit. He saw the quality of the fabric. He saw the expensive shoes. He saw the way she held her head chin up, eyes clear, radiating a fury that was all the more terrifying for its silence. Miller frowned, his gut honed by 3 decades of police work twisted. "What you got, Braden?" Miller asked, his voice gravelly. "Interference, disorderly failure to identify," Braden recited, placing a paper bag on the counter. "Suspect refused to provide ID during a suspicious person stop. Resisted arrest." Miller looked at Evelyn. "That true, ma'am?" "It is entirely false, Sergeant," Evelyn said. Her voice rang out in the booking room, clear and authoritative. "I was unlawfully detained while walking my dog. I asserted my Fourth Amendment rights. This officer assaulted me and kidnapped me." Miller's eyebrows shot up. "Kidnapped? That's a strong word." "It is the legal definition of moving a person against their will without lawful authority," Evelyn replied. "I would like my handcuffs removed, now." "We have to process you first," Braden interrupted. "Empty your pockets." Since her hands were cuffed, Braden reached into her tracksuit pocket. He pulled out a slim leather wallet. He tossed it onto the counter in front of Miller. "Check it," Braden said. "She claims she's some kind of judge." Miller put down his coffee mug. He reached out and opened the wallet. The air in the room seemed to be sucked into a vacuum. Sergeant Miller stared at the contents of the wallet. First, he saw the driver's license. Evelyn Marie Moore. The address was on Maple Drive, the most expensive street in the district. Then he flipped the flap. There, behind clear plastic, was a gold badge. It wasn't a police badge. It was the seal of the state judiciary. Below it was an identification card. The Honorable Evelyn M. Moore, Presiding Judge, Family Court Division, Superior Court of the State. Miller stared at it for a full 5 seconds. He blinked. He read it again. He looked at the photo on the ID, then looked at the woman standing in front of him. It was the same face. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. His heart skipped a beat, then hammered against his ribs. He slowly closed the wallet and looked up at Braden. His expression was one of profound pity and horror. "Braden," Miller whispered, "give me the keys to the cuffs." "What?" Braden asked, confused. "Why, we haven't printed her yet." "Give me the goddamn keys," Miller roared, slamming his hand on the counter. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Every officer in the bullpen stopped what they were doing and looked over. Braden flinched. He fumbled for his keys and handed them to the sergeant. Miller came around the desk, moving faster than he had in years. He walked behind Evelyn and unlocked the cuffs. "Judge Moore," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. I cannot apologize enough." Evelyn brought her hands forward. She rubbed her wrists. Deep red indentations circled her skin. She looked at them, then looked at Miller. "Sergeant," she said coldly, "who is the watch commander on duty?" "Captain Henderson, ma'am. He's in his office." "Get him, now." Miller turned to a young officer standing nearby, open-mouthed. "Get the captain. Run." Braden was standing there looking between Miller and Evelyn. The arrogance was evaporating, replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. "Sarge, is it real?" Miller looked at Braden with disgust. "You idiot. You absolute moron. You just arrested Judge Moore. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She matched the description." Braden stammered, his voice rising in panic. "She refused ID." She's a federal-level judge in this state, Miller hissed. She signs the warrants you ask for. She puts the people you arrest in prison, and you brought her in for walking her dog. The door to the captain's office burst open. Captain Henderson, a tall, bald man with silver spectacles, marched out looking annoyed at the disturbance. "What is going on out here? I can hear you yelling from—" He stopped. He saw Evelyn Moore standing by the booking desk, rubbing her wrists. He knew her. They had served on a criminal justice reform panel together 2 years prior. "Judge Moore?" Henderson asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Captain Henderson," Evelyn said. She didn't smile. "It has been a long time." "What? Why are you here?" Henderson looked at the officers, then saw the handcuffs on the counter. His eyes widened behind his glasses. "Your officer," Evelyn pointed a steady finger at Braden, "decided that a black woman walking a golden retriever in Chestnut Hill was a threat to public safety. He detained me without cause. He assaulted me. He arrested me when I asserted my rights, and he ignored my identification of myself." Henderson turned to Braden. The look on the captain's face was terrifying. It was the look of a man watching his precinct's budget and reputation burn to the ground. "Braden," Henderson said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did you arrest a superior court judge?" I didn't know, sir. She wouldn't show ID." "Did you have reasonable suspicion?" Henderson barked. "She fit the description." "What description?" Evelyn cut in. "Black and female. That is not a description, officer. That is a demographic." The dynamics of power in the room had completely inverted. 10 minutes ago, Evelyn was a prisoner, a number, a body to be processed. Now she was the highest authority in the building. "Judge, please come to my office," Captain Henderson said, gesturing frantically. "Let's get you some water. We can straighten this out." "No, Captain," Evelyn said firmly. "We will not straighten this out in private. We will handle this right here on the record." She walked over to the counter and picked up her wallet. She checked to ensure nothing was missing. "I am leaving now," Evelyn announced. "But before I go, I am issuing a verbal preservation order. Captain, I want the body camera footage from Officer Braden immediately downloaded and secured. I want the dash cam footage. I want the GPS logs of his vehicle. I want the dispatch recordings of the initial call he claims to have received. If 1 second of that footage goes missing, if one log entry is deleted, I will have the district attorney bring charges for destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice against every person in this chain of command. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, Judge," Henderson said. He was sweating. "It will be locked down within the hour. I want a copy of the incident report by close of business today," Evelyn continued. "And I want the name and badge number of the sergeant on duty." She nodded at Miller. Though, to be fair, Sergeant Miller acted appropriately once he discovered the error. The liability lies with Officer Braden. Braden was standing against the wall. He looked small. He looked young. He looked like a child who had broken a priceless vase and was waiting for the spanking. "You," Evelyn said, turning to him one last time. "You have no business wearing that uniform. You lack the temperament, the judgment, and the basic knowledge of the law required for the job. You viewed me not as a citizen to be protected, but as a subject to be subjugated. You are dangerous." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked toward the exit. Captain Henderson followed her. "Judge, can I offer you a ride home? I'll drive you myself." "I would rather walk," Evelyn said. "But my ankle is sore from being shoved into your car. You may call me a taxi." "I'll call a town car service on the department's account," Henderson said quickly. "Fine." Evelyn waited in the lobby. She didn't sit. She stood staring at the wall, composing herself. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain in her shoulder was sharpening into a dull, throbbing ache. She felt a wave of exhaustion hit her, but she pushed it back. There would be time to rest later. Now was the time for war. When the car arrived, she got in without a word. She watched the police station fade into the distance. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, which Miller had returned to her. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Hello?" a voice answered. It was David Gold, the best civil rights attorney in the state, and a personal friend. "David," Evelyn said. "It's Evelyn. Are you free for lunch? I have a case for you, and you are going to want to sit down when I tell you who the plaintiff is." The lawsuit hit the city clerk's desk at 9:00 a.m. on Monday morning. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting, precise, brutal, and unassailable. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false arrest, excessive force, and malicious prosecution. It named the city, the police department, and Officer Kyle Braden individually. By noon, the story had leaked to the press. By 2:00 p.m., the video from Mrs. Higgins' porch was on every news channel in the country. The visual was undeniable. A calm, well-dressed black woman standing on a manicured lawn, asking reasonable questions, being manhandled by a young, aggressive white officer. The moment where he cuffed her while the elderly white neighbor took the dog became an instant symbol of the racial disparities in policing. The fallout was swift and catastrophic for the department. The internal affairs investigation, usually a slow, opaque process, was completed in record time. The evidence was overwhelming. The suspicious person report Braden had cited turned out to be a call from 3 hours prior in a different neighborhood describing a teenager in a hoodie. Braden had fabricated the connection to justify his stop. Furthermore, a review of Braden's history revealed a pattern. In his 4 years, he had stopped black motorists at 4 times the rate of white motorists. He had a history of insubordination complaints from citizens that had been dismissed by previous supervisors. But they couldn't dismiss this one. They couldn't dismiss Judge Evelyn Moore. 3 weeks later, Kyle Braden sat across a table from the chief of police and his union representative. The union rep, usually a bulldog for his officers, was silent. He had viewed the footage. He had read the judge's deposition. He knew there was no defense. "Officer Braden," the chief said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. We are also recommending to the state board that your certification be permanently revoked. You will not be a police officer in this state or any state ever again." Braden tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I was just following procedure." "No," the chief said. "You were following your bias, and you picked the wrong woman to inflict it upon. Hand over your badge and gun." The settlement negotiations with the city took less than a month. The city attorney knew they would lose in court, and a jury trial involving a sitting judge as the victim would result in a verdict in the millions. They offered $850,000. Evelyn accepted. She didn't keep a dime. In a press conference held on the steps of the courthouse, Evelyn stood before a bank of microphones. Her shoulder was still in a brace. Barnaby sat faithfully by her side. "I am accepting this settlement," Evelyn told the reporters, "not as compensation for my dignity because dignity cannot be bought. I am accepting it as a penalty against the city for allowing a culture of unchecked power to fester in its police department." She held up a check. "The entire amount of $850,000 is being donated today to the Legal Aid Society specifically to fund a new division dedicated to representing indigent citizens who have been victims of police misconduct. Because for every Judge Moore, there are 1,000 citizens who don't know the law, who don't have the resources, and who are currently sitting in jail because an officer like Kyle Braden decided they looked suspicious." 6 months later, Evelyn was back on her walk. The morning was crisp, the leaves on the oak trees turning a brilliant shade of burnt orange. Barnaby was trotting happily, sniffing the autumn air. The neighborhood was the same, yet different. The patrol cars that drove by now slowed down not to intimidate, but to wave. The officers inside were different, more diverse, more cautious, more respectful. The consent decree that had followed the Department of Justice's investigation into the city's policing practices was in full effect. Mandatory training on implicit bias was now standard. The stop and ID policy had been completely rewritten. Mrs. Higgins was on her porch watering her chrysanthemums. She waved as Evelyn walked by. "Morning, Evelyn. How's the shoulder?" "Much better, Martha." "Thank you," Evelyn called back. She continued walking her stride strong and steady. But as she reached the corner where it had happened, she paused. She looked at the spot on the sidewalk. She thought about Kyle Braden. She had heard through the grapevine that he had moved back to his parents' house in Ohio, working in a warehouse. He was angry, she assumed. He likely blamed her for ruining his life. He would never understand that he had ruined it himself the moment he decided that his badge gave him the right to bully a citizen. Evelyn Moore was a woman of the law. She believed in order. She believed in the system. But she also knew with a clarity that only experience can bring that the system is only as good as the people who enforce it. She had won. Justice had been served. But as she stood there watching a young black teenager ride his bicycle down the street, she felt a lingering weight in her chest. She had survived because of who she was, because of her title, her education, her connections. What if I had been a nurse, she thought. What if I had been a teacher or a housekeeper? Would they have believed me? Would I be in a cell right now waiting for a public defender charged with resisting arrest? The answer was a cold, hard stone in her stomach. She tightened her grip on the leash. "Come on, Barnaby," she whispered. "We have work to do." She walked on, leaving the spot behind, but carrying the memory forward. She would take it with her into the courtroom every single day. She would use it to see the people standing before her bench, not just as defendants or plaintiffs, but as human beings caught in a machine that could grind them to dust if no one was watching. The camera had captured everything, yes. But it was what happened after the camera stopped rolling, the tireless work of reform, the funding of defense for the poor, the constant vigilance that truly mattered. Evelyn Moore was a judge, but on that sidewalk she was just a citizen, and she would never forget that the distance between the two was shorter than a heartbeat and more fragile than a promise.